people I don't even know, like you, or people at the university. It's a love fest. It is. Speaking at the university, I got like 10 likes on Facebook. And they're like totally supportive. California, totally supportive. And it's amazing being a writer, how people you just met are completely supportive, and people you knew for years completely hate you. Doesn't make sense to me, you know. But I think it's just human nature. So when you're writing, and be proud of yourself. Just don't write in the dark and don't tell anybody. Tell the world. You're advertising yourself. Every day, every breath you take, you're advertising yourself. Even to your friends. Okay? Like you're writing poems, right? You're writing poems. And what do you do during the day?
What do you mean? For a living?
Sure.
I write memos.
They
treat all the energy out of
Yeah,
me.
so you're still writing.
I'm still writing. That's
Okay,
like,
well, you're a bad case for this scenario. Say you're writing, but what do you do? Let's say
write reports.
well, let's say you write, you're writing stories. Well, fictional. Let's say you work at McDonald's at Independence Square, but you're writing a book. Okay? Well, when you meet your friends, what do you say? Hey, I do fries at McDonald's. I'm a genius at it. It's amazing. You have a little salt on there. I make the best fries, really. Come and check it out. No, you don't say that. You say, yeah, I'm a writer. I'm writing this right now. This is what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. No, you got to advertise yourself at every single time. And number one's writing. Number two is advertise. Now, for me, what I'm doing now, how I'm advertising, is you want to do minimal. You want to do it at almost no cost. So appearing at a convention is no cost. And getting a bunch of media guys and doing interviews, no cost, right? And you reach hundreds of thousands of people, and it's easy to do. You contact radio stations. If you can't get radio stations are hard. You know what you do? You go to these conventions and you network with people. You get a business card. You write blah, blah, blah. I got a bunch of them if you want them. And I got bookmarks and books if you want those too after today. And you network. For example, in California, everyone and their mother has a podcast. Okay? I'll get on any podcast. Anything it takes to get your name out there. Because even if this guy does his own podcast and he has 5 people listening, that's 5 more people you didn't have before you got on the podcast. It just takes one person, right? Mother Teresa, when she was alive, they asked her, well, you're in Calcutta, India, and you have so many people living in the streets, so much disease, so much famine, so much misery. How are you going to help all these people? And she says, I don't. I help one. One at a time. That is what you have to do when you're writing. It's all about the one person at a time, right? And a lot of writers don't go to universities. I love going to universities because they're young people, okay? Well, I consider myself young people too, but you understand what I'm saying. They're young people, and when I meet them, my whole hope is that they'll always remember me, and that they'll stay with me on Facebook. We'll always talk and communicate. I've even offered them yesterday. I wrote on my Facebook page, hey, if you guys from the university, any of you are ever in San Francisco, come on. If you're coming on out, call me. I'll take you out to Chinatown, the Golden Gate Bridge. I'll show you all the sites. Because I know we have to go, right? Sorry, I can talk for hours. Don't do what a lot of writers do, and this is what they do. I'm sorry. I'll do book signings for free. I do autographs for free. I do pictures for free. I do just about anything for free. Okay? A lot of writers nowadays, what they do, and we're not talking J.K. Rowling. I'm talking smaller writers. They say, look, if I'm doing a book signing, I want at least $5 to $10 grand. Okay? If you want a picture with me, it's $20.
What?
Yeah.
No.
If you want my autograph, it's
Really?
30.
People do that?
Yeah, if you want my autograph, it's $30. Okay? Now, what's this going to do? Yeah, you might be making...
They do that in the zoo, you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah, I
if
know.
you want a picture
Yeah.
with a monkey.
Yeah, you might be making some money, okay? But I guarantee you, it doesn't work. Offer free autographs, pictures. First of all, I love pictures. I love pictures of people, okay? Because I love people. You want to know something? When I leave Ukraine, I'll have pictures of your monasteries, of all your historical sites, okay? Being one of the pictures I'm going to truly cherish the most are the pictures with the people. You want to know why? Because through all my travels, especially going to England, finding the old guy at the end of the pub, I sit with him and I learn from him, because you learn from people. Your monastery, your Independence Square, in 100 years, that's going to still be standing. You know what? You're not. You will be gone, right? So for me, the pictures I cherish the most are with the people that I meet. And those are the pictures that, when I am on my own deathbed, those are the pictures I want to collect. Not the ones with the buildings or with Big Ben or with, whatever that thing in Paris is. It's going to be of the people, right? Because for me, people are more amazing than any historical structure, even though I love historical structures. All right, so that's why pictures are always free. Autographs are free, because you know what? When I'm signing an autograph, it means something to me, but it also means something to the person you're giving it to. So when you become famous, don't treat people like assholes, okay? Treat them with care, love, and respect, and with honor. And when I'm here in Ukraine, I honor every single human being, right? And that's what you guys should take as well. So I'm sorry, that is all. And I'll leave it on that somber note. I have bookmarks if you want them. I can sign anything, take pictures with anything, okay? I just want to say one last, I don't want to embarrass you. And Ukrainians are the most lovely people I have ever met. Really, I've traveled all over Europe, all over the United States, Moscow, London, and Ukrainians have brought the warmest, sincere, in California we say awesome, welcome. The first day here I spoke at Kyiv University, and that was a very amazing experience. I spoke at the American Council in Kyiv and several other locations since I've been here. Being an American, conventions are our thing. It's our thing. We love conventions. And has anyone ever been to an American convention? Anyone ever seen pictures of an American convention? Just an example, 2 weeks ago I was at a convention in Los Angeles called WonderCon. And it's the second largest convention in the United States. And it runs about 10,000 people. So you can imagine 10,000 people going to a convention, and many of them dress up as comic book superheroes, and it's an amazing thing. And 2 weeks ago, Bruce Campbell came to visit. If you know who Bruce Campbell is, he was the star of the original Evil Dead film, and he's producing the new Evil Dead film. So since these conventions are in Hollywood, it's not difficult to get Tom Cruise walking into a convention. You know, in July I'll be appearing at Comic-Con. If you've heard of Comic-Con, it's actually the largest convention in the world, and that takes place in San Diego. And you get just about everybody there. For example, I was speaking to Mr. Priest outside. We're talking about Doctor Who, which is a British television series, science fiction. And it's a show I've been watching in the United States since I was 6 years old.
And you'll get the whole entire cast of Doctor Who going to Comic-Con. You get everyone who wants to promote their movies. You get Robert Downey Jr. walking through the halls, and you just walk up to him and take pictures with him. So, in regards to Ukraine, the United States has been an independent country for a little over 200 years. And Ukraine, just a little over 20 years, right? So, my dream for fantasy and sci-fi fans is hopefully come to Ukraine and have Mecca of conventions. And get Tom Cruise here, right? Yeah. Now, I don't know if any of you are like my Facebook page, or if any of you have been on my YouTube channel, or any other my media outlets, but my public relations people had me here for all 4 days at EuroCon. And I was here the first day, and I did some television, interviews while I was here. And I have to apologize because I wasn't here all 4 days. I was here only a couple hours during opening ceremonies. I left and haven't returned until about half an hour ago. And that's just because they had me scheduled speaking at other locations throughout Kyiv. So for sure, I'm definitely here today. And I'm happy that, you're all able to make it here. And I hope you're all enjoying yourself. Now, let me talk about the topic, and that is fantasy, the history of it in the United States. I can go on and talk about my favorite subject, which is myself. But we won't do that today. All I will say is that I've been writing since the age of 6, and I've been writing novels, film scripts, television scripts, you name it, I've written it, and right now I'm working on a comic book in the United States. So I have my hands in just about every type of genre of writing possible. And I think I'll be doing it for the rest of my life. It's the only thing I know how to do. I'll tell you, I'll begin with the American history, in regards to fantasy, is I traveled to Mexico, and is where it all starts. And I was climbing the Mayan ruins. I was heavily involved in studying the Mayan culture, which is an ancient culture in Mexico. Because ancient culture is fascinating. And there's a lot of controversy with a lot of the ancient ruins and their writings and their petroglyphs and pictoglyphs. Pictoglyphs and petroglyphs, what they are is they're like etchings in stone, or they're like ancient paintings that tell a story. And even back in the Middle Ages with churches and stained glass, the reason why you have stained glass in churches is to tell the story of what's in the Bible, because people didn't know how to read. So it was the same way with the ancient Mayans. They painted pictures so you can basically read the story through pictures. And there's a lot of controversy in regards to some of these ancient ruins, because there are some people who believe that the Mayans were visited by aliens from outer space, and that you'll see a design of it looks like a spaceship over some etchings of people, Mayan people. We don't know what these things mean, because the Mayan culture is gone. We can't even really read the language. We can only guess. But there are many who believe that aliens visited the Mayans. Well, when I thought about this, and I thought about this long and hard, I believe in aliens to an extent, but I believe they look exactly like us. Okay? And that's a whole other theory, a whole other topic that I can speak to you about for 4 hours, but I don't want to go deep into that. How I saw these pictures is that, how do we know that the Mayan drawing these pictures, how do we know he wasn't an ancient fantasy or sci-fi artist? Back then be considered an author. He was drawing what he imagined in his mind, and he was telling a tale, a fictional tale, instead of, documenting facts of history. And a lot of people don't think about that. They see etchings of ruins. Like, for example, I was at the monastery in Kyiv, where you have a lot of saints buried in the caves. One of the most amazing places I've ever been. It's a very moving and extremely holy place. And the thing is, I went to a museum and they had some artifacts of ancient culture 400 years BC. The Scythes, or the Scythians, if you've heard of them. And they were in the area of the Black Sea, about 400 BC, and they actually originated from Iran and traveled to the Ukrainian area, but later eventually died off, the culture died off. And recently, I believe your government had found the ruins. But there was things in the museum that had dragons eating horses and grabbing people. Now, if you and I are looking at these artifacts, we know that there was no dragons. It's just myth, it's fantasy. So I believe when we see these ruins, that it's just someone telling a story. So I believe that these people were the first fantasy writers, telling a fantasy story. I will tell you the best fantasy authors in the world, at least in the beginning of the 20th century, are the British. And in my opinion, the greatest fantasy author that's ever lived was Tolkien. The Hobbit is the Holy Bible to people who love fantasy. And if there was not a Bible, everyone would probably be carrying one in their pocket. That is the book that got me started into reading The Hobbit when I was 5 years old. And then as I got older, I read Lord of the Rings. And then as I got into high school, I started reading C.S. Lewis. Is anyone familiar with C.S. Lewis? Yeah. He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. It's interesting because in Russia, I asked if they knew C.S. Lewis, and they didn't know who he was. So that's why I asked. Almost every American writer emulates the British writers. Okay, I like to say that the British writers created today's fantasy, and Americans practically just perfected it. But nothing will ever be as great as the Lord of the Rings. I think that is the mecca of all fantasy. And all I can do is do my best to top it. That's the standard that you want to use when writing fantasy, is Lord of the Rings. But, you look at Lord of the Rings, and he created entire languages, an entire elf language. It's like Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek, creating the Klingon language. I don't know if I can ever get that in depth, because that would take me at least 5 years, and I have a rule myself that I write one book a year. Because in this day and age with technology, you have to come out with at least one book a year if you're a writer, because it keeps you relevant. If you're not relevant, you're forgotten. And there's someone new, that's like, J.K. Rowling crops up, or someone else. So, Americans always emulate Tolkien and Lewis. Nowadays, you don't see a lot of fantasy books in the United States. I mean, you do. There's books that come out every week. And I'm sure you've heard of TSR, possibly in the 80s. They created Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing game. Have you heard of Dungeons and Dragons? Anyone? Yeah? So Americans have created many games and books to add to the fantasy genre. But fantasy really has never become popular in the United States until the late 70s, when Tolkien had a resurgence in his writing, and a animated Lord of the Rings movie came out in 1977. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen that. That was the first Lord of the Rings film. And that is really when fantasy in the United States took off. Before that, it was basically dead. The reason why, because Americans seem to be more interested in science fiction. For example, if you look at film, in the United States, every week there was a science fiction movie coming out in the theaters. I mean, really, really bad ones, and then from time to time, really, really good ones. And I recommend, if you want to see a lot of really bad sci-fi and fantasy movies, that you Google Mystery Science Theater 3000. It's a comedy show, but it's three guys who sit in chairs, and it's like you're in a movie theater with them, and they're just making fun of bad movies. Okay, so Google that, check that out, and you guys will just die laughing. It was a show in the 80s, but it's hilarious. So Americans really haven't caught on to fantasy really until the late 70s. For me, myself, I'm 43 years old, born in 1969. The reason why I got into fantasy was Tolkien, British guy, reading The Hobbit. But also, my family comes from England. My family came to the United States in 1920. In the United States, everyone who lives there came from somewhere else. Okay? So, when I go back to England, I actually have more family in England still than I do in the United States. And when I was a kid, I would run up and down the castles, in England. I'd go to the museums and see this wonderful English history of the Middle Ages. So I connected with the Crusader era of the Crusades. And I fantasized and dreamed as a kid of being in the Crusades and going to the Holy Land and all of this. Because I was so exposed to it when I was in England. And in England, when I was a kid, one of my heroes was Richard the Lionheart. I thought him and Charlemagne were the two magnificent heroes from the past. And today they still influence me in my writing from time to time. And, when you're a kid, a lot of those things you keep as an adult. But as an adult, you just expand on it. So England, for me, was the root of my love for fantasy. There was nothing in the United States that influenced me. But of course, in England, and here as well, you have a lot of castles, you have a lot of fortresses, you have a lot of this amazing history that a writer or anybody can go and visit and read about, and it's just inspirational, right? In the United States, we don't have that. Our oldest buildings are the mid-1700s. In England, I've stayed in hotels older than that, right? So Americans use Europe as the inspiration for their writings. And admittedly, so do I, obviously. I write a whole genre of things like I mentioned. And I write a lot of short stories. Out of everything I've ever written, only 2 short stories take place in the United States. Everything I've ever written happens in Europe. And I've wrote some stories, that takes place in Russia. Just a little story, I was at Tchaikovsky's estate home in Kyiv when I was in Russia. And I'm a big listener of Tchaikovsky ever since I was a kid. I love the Nutcracker and all his works. And I wanted to visit his estate home. And it so inspired me that I sat in the back of his estate home and wrote a short story there. Just right there on his property. It was just overwhelming for me. And when it's overwhelming, I just have to write, you know. And I wrote a short story called The Mighty Babushka. Because to me, babushkas are like the police officers of Russia. You know? And a Russian told me, well, you shouldn't write about Russian characters because you're not Russian, you're an American. So it's insulting. So, but after they read The Mighty Babushka, they said, all is forgiven. It's an awesome story. And yesterday, because I mentioned that I write about, you know, European characters. All my characters are Europeans, or Russians, what have you. Really no American characters. And someone yesterday at one of my lectures came up to me and said, well, are you the stereotypical American?